The Chernobyl explosion was only the beginning. Beneath the reactor, 200 tons of molten fuel burned toward 5 million gallons of water, threatening a second blast. Could it devastate Minsk or render half of Europe uninhabitable? 3 men were sent into that flooded basement. For decades, the world mourned them as a suicide squad who died in agony. They survived, and nearly everything about this story is wrong. Hours after the initial destruction of Reactor 4, a silent threat took shape beneath the debris. Inside the shattered structure, highly radioactive, molten material melted through concrete floors, migrating downward toward reservoirs of water. Plant engineers feared that if this hot mass contacted the flooded basements, it would trigger a violent steam explosion. Later accounts claimed this secondary blast would have flattened surrounding cities and poisoned the continent for generations. Separating the documented hazard from apocalyptic myth requires looking past these sensational claims to examine the raw physics of what emergency crews actually faced. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. The disaster at the RBMK 1000 unit began during a low-power safety test, triggering a sudden, uncontrollable power surge. The resulting steam and chemical explosions tore the reactor building apart, blowing off the massive shield lid and scattering highly radioactive debris across the roof and surrounding grounds. Firefighters and plant crews immediately battled the fires, pouring millions of liters of emergency water into the burning ruins in a desperate bid to cool the exposed reactor core. But as they fought the disaster from above, that cooling water traveled down. It flooded the dark concrete chambers directly beneath the plant, creating an unseen hazard below. Beneath the ruins, the melting reactor core transformed into corium, a highly radioactive lava-like mixture of uranium fuel, zirconium cladding, steel, concrete, and sand. Soviet post-accident reports estimated this shifting mass weighed approximately 200 tons as it slowly burned through the concrete floors heading downward. Directly in its path lay the bubbler pools, a pressure suppression system holding what emergency summaries estimate was 5 million gallons of water. If this white-hot mass contacted the water, rapid vaporization would trigger a violent steam explosion. Soviet physicists feared a destructive pressure pulse that would shatter the remaining structures and disperse massive plumes of radioactive material. While popular legends later claimed this blast would reach multi-megaton nuclear proportions, physical assessments reject that scale, estimating a yield comparable to a localized chemical explosion. Even so, the risk of structural collapse and widespread contamination made removing the water the most urgent operational priority. To drain the basements, plant management called on 3 specific employees. Alexei Ananenko was a senior mechanical engineer who knew the reactor department's underground layout. Valery Bezpalov served as a senior engineer in the turbine shop. Boris Baranov, the shift manager, accompanied them to supervise the operation. Their objective was a practical plant correction: navigate the flooded corridors, locate the drainage valves, and manually release the water. Despite the severe hazards, records show the mission was treated as a necessary technical task. However, popular history recast this event as a fatal sacrifice. The media labeled the men a suicide squad of divers entering a certain death zone. The legend claims they quickly died in agony and were buried in lead-lined coffins to contain the radiation. Testing this narrative against documented evidence reveals whether these 3 men were truly doomed, or if the reality of their mission differs from the myth. The Suicide Squad label is a product of later media framing rather than any documented military designation. Records indicate Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bezpalov, and Boris Baranov were regular plant employees executing a dangerous technical task within an emergency command structure. While the mission required immense courage, no contemporary document treats it as a ceremonial death run. Second, no available record establishes that these men held professional diving certifications. The term divers serves as dramatic shorthand. Descriptions of their gear remain highly disputed. Accounts conflict on whether they wore wetsuits or entered barefoot. The record shows they navigated the flooded corridors on foot rather than conducting a conventional underwater dive. Third, the popular account of the men dying in agonizing radiation sickness within days is unsupported by the documentary record. The legend likely merged their mission with the fates of actual first responders who succumbed to acute radiation exposure. Finally, The claim of burial in unique lead-lined coffins is not established. Highly radioactive casualties were typically interred in zinc containers, but no record connects these three men to those sealed graves. Across all conflicting accounts, whether the entry occurred in late April or on May 6, the verifiable core is that these plant workers entered the basement, found the valves, and manually drained the pools. The drainage of the bubbler pools was only the initial phase of a much larger coordinated mobilization. While the three engineers successfully opened the manual release valves, keeping the basements clear of water required continuous, heavy-duty drainage. The Soviet military deployed the 427th Separate Regiment, a specialized engineering unit, to operate high-capacity pumps in the highly radioactive lower levels of the plant. Because detailed unit logs from those chaotic days remain classified or incomplete, the exact headcount and shift rotations of these pump crews are difficult to verify, but their work sustained the drainage effort for days. Simultaneously, a second crisis loomed: the possibility of the molten fuel burning through the concrete pad into the groundwater below. To prevent this, Soviet authorities mobilized coal miners from the Tula and Donbas regions. Approximately 400 miners traveled to the site to excavate a tunnel 150 meters long, starting from beneath the adjacent Reactor 3 and ending directly under the damaged Reactor 4. Working in extreme conditions, with temperatures reportedly reaching up to 140 degrees Celsius and virtually no ventilation, the crews dug around the clock to install a reinforced concrete slab and a liquid nitrogen heat exchanger. Although the core cooled before the system was ever activated, this massive underground effort joined plant engineers, military units, and thousands of unnamed liquidators in a shared containment campaign. This collective defense ultimately halted the disaster's spread, turning attention from the human effort to the physical path where the radioactive mass finally ground to a halt. The narrative of three doomed divers perishing in agony is refuted by the historical record. Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov all survived the basement mission. Ananenko and Bespalov lived to see the world learn the truth. On April 26, 2018, 32 years after the disaster, they stood in Kyiv to receive Ukraine's Order for Courage, 3rd class, from the president. Boris Baranov was not there to stand with his colleagues. He had continued working at the plant for many years before dying of a heart attack in 2005 at age 64. Ukraine recognized his service posthumously in 2019 with the Hero of Ukraine title. The world had spent decades mourning 3 dead martyrs while 2 of them were still living. This survival corrects the false outcome without making their task any less dangerous. Beneath the shattered reactor, the molten fuel also reached its end. Moving through the lower levels, the liquid mass cooled against the massive concrete structures. The flow solidified into a dark, glassy mound of uranium, zirconium, and silica known as the Elephant's Foot. Discovered in the fall of 1986, this formation represents the physical arrest of the melt, halted not by an apocalyptic secondary blast, but by concrete geometry and heat loss. The real rescue was a collective effort of engineers, pump crews, and miners, proving that history is shaped by documented teamwork rather than invented sacrifice. Tell us in the comments which historical legend should be put on trial next, and subscribe for weekly history breakdowns about moments that almost went the other way. Today, we still prefer tragic myths over complex realities. Yet as modern crises intensify, our survival relies on collective action, not isolated martyrs. Chernobyl's real history reminds us that salvation is never a solo sacrifice. It is a shared human responsibility.